First Sgt Koepp here with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters, and today we come to you from Belleau, France, at the 4th Marine Brigade Memorial at Belleau Wood, which the French commanding general actually renamed the Wood of the Marine Brigade for their gallant actions in helping save France and Paris, particularly during the German 1918 spring offensive. In early 1918, the Germans punched so hard into the French lines that they desperately needed American support. Pershing sent in the Marines, and to no surprise, the Marines managed to push back the Germans rather quickly, and Belleau Wood was a major point of success for the Marine Corps. And right now I'm I wanted to talk to you from this French 75mm cannon about research today. For those of you who don't know, the French 75 was, when it was made by the French at the turn of the century, was cutting-edge military technology. You can see it's one of the first recoilless rifles and was designed for a highly mobile wartime effort. Unfortunately, these proved useless against the Germans, who were able to utilize arcing fire, where they could lob large shells from great distances straight up in the air and hit their targets. Now, the French 75s were highly mobile and accurate and fast shooting, about 20 rounds a minute on a trained crew, couldn't attain the same level of elevation as the German guns could. But the Americans, we love these ones, and as the Americans moved so quickly during their time in World War I, we often outpaced not only communications but also our own artillery's ability to keep up with us. These light guns really made a big difference for us. But to go back to research, in a previous video, I talked about the importance of historical accuracy in living history and understanding our personas and the people and the events that we're trying to portray. And I wanted to kind of open up a conversation. This isn't by any means exhaustive, but I wanted to put some ideas and encourage you to maybe share some of your own insights and connections on how to find good research resources as we delve into these historical events and develop our personas, either personally or our unit persona. Now, everyone should be able to start out with your basic drill manuals, whether it's Hardee's or Casey's for Civil War reenacting. Both of those and many, many more from the Civil War are available free in Google Library. And also, depending on the unit that you portray, sometimes you can find regimental histories online for free through Google. There's also numerous other manuals throughout different conflicts and military organizations that you can start with to understand and thoroughly know all the military drill, routine, regulations, articles of war that would have been well memorized by any fighting soldier at the time. It's also a good source to find hard to find books. Some books that may cost a fortune in print are sometimes free or available for an e-download through places like Google or Amazon. And so those are going to be your broad stroke research sources. Other things include just making sure you know the general history of the time period you're studying. So you're going to want to make sure that you understand sort of the political and cultural concepts and controversies of the Civil War or World War I, so you kind of understand the broad scheme of things. You'll want to understand and research why your unit was formed, who formed it, what was their inspiration for fighting. In the Civil War, were they stout Unionists? Were they abolitionists? Were they just conscripts? And they were just there because the government told them they had to be there. And that reality can be true on both the North and the South. Did your person in your company form early? Did they kind of ride the patriotism and nationalism bandwagon? All sorts of those little details really influence your persona and your your person's view of the war. The next layer that you're going to want to find and dig into is going to be your regimental histories, if they exist. Many of the states publish sort of anthologies, and a lot of those can be kind of dry, but they're more like battle descriptions of all the events that regiment partaked in during their term of service. The next layer, and probably the best as far as understanding individual people, are going to be memoirs and diaries. When it comes to soldier narratives, understanding soldier life, what they ate, how they slept, how they built their shelters, how they marched, sort of the goofy things that they've seen. I know a lot of time especially when we do military reenacting, it can kind of get somber, and we focus on sort of the horrors and the loss and the brutality of war. But a lot of the diaries reveal a lot of the goofy sides of soldiers, which is a really powerful juxtaposition of trying to maintain that humanity and still being normal people in the midst of overwhelming brutality. And it's also a good insight into soldier life because they also interact with civilians. I was reading a sharpshooter one, and it talked about a woman soldier in disguise who got found out when she was discovered to be pregnant. But you also have to keep in mind that it's great because soldier life and monotony of war was 90% of their service. The 10% was just brutal terror and fierce fighting. But you have a whole lot of downtime where the soldiers can kind of be themselves. The one thing I would say to be careful about when it comes to soldier diaries and narratives, soldiers, and this is good across time periods, soldiers often give the worst accounts of battle. And it's not to any fault of their own, but it's sort of the battle survival psychology that, these soldiers are in really intense moments, and the way your brain works is you get tunnel vision. And so if they do write about the battle as it's happening, they can only really attest to what's immediately in front of them and who is immediately on their side. And when they reflect on the battle, it tends to be general, or it could be less accurate. If for some reason you get fortunate and your regiment has lots of soldier diaries, that might be a good way to read multiple diaries and kind of accumulate that shared knowledge into a cohesive image of what actually happened. And the other thing too is if you're reading post-battle, post-war reports, you're going to want to read the edition, the first edition publications of those. One thing that you see, especially in Civil War reenacting, is sort of the anniversary started rolling around, which started to become really popular around the 1890s in the U.S. for both sides, where soldiers were writing or rewriting their memoirs. They tend to be a little more dramatic, a little more theatric. People's actions tend to be trumpeted as they're focused quite a bit on their legacy. Some soldiers and officers did it deliberately, others did it innocently, but that's one important thing to keep in mind. And then depending, like in World War I, we were reminded by a superintendent at an American Battle Monument that especially like German World War I narratives could eventually be turned into Nazi propaganda for the Second World War. So if you're reading a 1940s version, it's going to be quite a bit different and quite heavily edited compared to the first edition right after the war, say 1920. And then you're going to, if you're a college student and you know someone in college, I know our privates Soderling are in college right now, and they've been using full advantage of their college library and their resources because they get free access to otherwise paid services. When they're not doing all their homework, they also take the opportunity to study resources available through college libraries or old documents available through microfiche that you can actually order through your college library system. And some local libraries, if they have like regional library structures, can also help you with those resources. Now, if you want to go for, I guess, the gold star on your star chart for the day, I would encourage you to reach out to battle monuments. So if your soldiers and your unit were particularly distinguished in, say, the Battle of Antietam, you might want to seriously consider contacting the people at the battlefield for particular resources available for your unit. And the people at the battle monuments and at the museums are more likely to have resources that aren't easily available or attainable by everyday researchers. And they're also going to have a bigger library of primary resources. And primary resources are what you really, really want to get the most accurate detail of what happened. And then you're going to want to ask them, when you find someone who's a researcher that knows a lot about what you want to know, ask them who to talk to. You'd be surprised at how many everyday people who aren't affiliated with the university or aren't affiliated with the museum are actually experts in particular unit histories. I know with Company D, probably the leading Company D sharpshooter historian is a recently retired sea captain, and he lives in Maine, and he has access to all those resources, as well as the ability to visit their actual graves and read newspaper articles of their time of service after the war. And also with newspapers, as technology and the internet continues to grow and expand, more and more online sources are providing old newspapers in their entirety available for free and for search. So those are great. You can sometimes find actual post-battle news reports that could be really helpful for your research. And if you know specific soldiers in your unit, you can actually search for those soldiers to see if they were written about in their home paper. Maybe there's more information in their obituary, if they were given a local award, if there was an interview done by them. And you'd be surprised at how much research you can find through online searching of old newspapers. And then the other thing may not apply to everybody, but I hope you just kind of think about the concept if it doesn't exactly apply to you. So we were visiting, we've been to so many memorials, I can't even remember the name of the place. But we were talking to the superintendent at the American Battle Monuments there. And he gave us a great tour. He told us all this information about the exact troop movements and who did what. And I was asking him about, what should I read? Because that's kind of a question, like, what resources should I go to that are really good, in your opinion, as an expert in this very narrow area? And so he took me into his office, and we went through new books and old books. And the first, and I think most transformative thing he asked me is, do you read French? And I took 4 years of French in high school and college. And I used to be pretty good at it. And I was like, well, I can read a little. And since we've been on vacation, I can read a lot more. So why? I was like, well, the English are really biased when they write World War I narratives, like incredibly biased. The Americans don't write a whole lot about their term of service, and it tends to be pretty broad. Although with the centenary coming up, there's more quality resources and stories about World War I and our American service there. But he said the French have a completely different narrative. They fought with us. They have different resources. Their Ministry of Defense was photographing American soldiers in service. And so if you can, look for that. And he said, if you can find a French publisher of an English book. And that made me really start to think about bias and point of view in research. And being a history teacher and, an avid researcher and academic, I was like, wow, I can't believe I overlooked something so obvious as that. So we ended up at the Verdun Museum the next day. And after we toured the amazing museum there, we went to the bookstore, and I bought a French book by over half of the photos were from the French Ministry of Defense. And so you see essentially never before seen photos of American servicemen and women overseas in World War I. And that was amazing. And as my knowledge of verbs and doing a few quick searches on military-specific vocabulary, I was able to translate quite a bit. And that's a great thing. Military vocabulary is very specific and very repetitive. So if you can get down like, say, 20 or 30 words, you can read quite a bit in a foreign language, even if you're not that versed in it. And I was blown away as I was getting into this French language book on American service in World War I, how right the superintendent was. It was incredible. And just having like our culture and our reasons for joining the war seen through a different cultural light was really powerful and moving. And that made me think about Civil War reenacting. We had entire regiments that spoke only German. There were regiments that spoke half a dozen or more languages, all under different commands. So you would have Italian, French, German, and you would have, especially in the North with so many immigrants, that were all under this confusing command of this tapestry of foreign languages. What sort of resources would be available to you and insights to you would be available if you could tackle reading, say, a German soldier's account in German. I know the sharpshooters, we had German and Swiss units. That could be really compelling to kind of get those original accounts in their language. And for those of you who maybe don't have any knowledge of a foreign language, technology, again, is to your rescue. There are apps out there, and I think Google does it, where you can actually photograph a foreign language, and Google will translate that for you. So you have more ability to interact with primary source material in a whole new way to improve your impression. So thanks so much for watching this video. This wasn't exhaustive, but I wanted to kind of reach out to you, and since we talked about research, to maybe spark your interest in looking for sources. Sometimes we can hit dead ends, but whenever you meet a reenactor or you meet a historian or you go to a Civil War monument or memorial, ask someone, do you know anyone who knows information about this? Is there a book I can read? Is there a place I can go to? And I know some of our other units out there that have Civil War related channels or war related reenacting channels, they've actually been able to go to their unit's little local museum. And I think that is a huge advantage to have as a reenacting unit. So if there's anything I missed or something you'd like to comment on, let us know down below. As always, thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll catch you next time.